The APEC Leaders Summit convened in South Korea last week. Meanwhile, Trump met with President Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the summit to negotiate a truce in the ongoing trade war. Who won this round of the trade war, and what does this mean for the new Cold War on China? We'll discuss this and more on this week's China Report. Welcome to the China Report. Every week, we'll be helping you sort through all the propaganda with an independent view of the country that we're taught to hate but know so little about. I'm your host, Amanda Yee. These are this week's headlines. China's Shenzhou 21 spaceship has launched and docked with the Tiangong space station in just 3.5 hours, setting a new record in the history of the country's crewed space missions. The Shenzhou 21 spaceship took off as planned at 11:44 p.m. local time last Friday from its launch center in northwestern China. The 3 crew members of the mission joined the Shenzhou 20 astronauts already aboard Tiangong, beginning their roughly 6-month-long stay aboard the space station. The mission will include a range of science experiments spanning space life sciences and biotechnology, technology tests, fluid physics and microgravity, space medicine, space material science, and combustion. It will also include reproduction-related experiments with 4 mice, which also flew to Tiangong aboard the spacecraft. In its statements released about the mission, Beijing has emphasized Shenzhou 21 as a symbol of a nation that pursues balance, reason, and cooperation. According to Chinese media, quote, China firmly believes that space belongs to all humanity, not to any single nation or military bloc. The purpose of space exploration is to advance knowledge and technology, not to create new grounds for confrontation, unquote. China pitched greater integration among countries in the region to defeat growing protectionism and instability during the 47th ASEAN Summit. The summit was held from October 26th to 28th in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, and the meeting focused on strengthening cooperation among its member states. During the summit, China and ASEAN upgraded their existing free trade agreement to cover new areas such as digital trade, the green economy, sustainability, and support for small and medium-sized enterprises. ASEAN remains the largest trading partner of China, with trade totaling $1 trillion in 2024. In his address to the summit, Chinese Premier Li Qiang emphasized the greater need to implement President Xi Jinping's Global Governance Initiative, or GGI. He argued that the GGI was necessary to face the growing challenges in international politics. The GGI is a diplomatic initiative presented by Xi at this year's Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in September. Its 5 core concepts are staying committed to sovereign equality, to international rule of law, to multilateralism, to the people-centered approach, and to real results. Li stated, quote, China will work with all parties to ensure that this mission is observed and take vigorous actions to promote the GGI to boost peace and development in our region, unquote. Beijing delivered over 44,000 three-way stopcocks intended for critically ill patients to the Cuban health system. The donation, supported by students and residents in China and expedited by Cuba's Committees for the Defense of the Revolution, was received this weekend and will be distributed to various healthcare centers by the Ministry of Public Health. The CDR emphasized the importance of the contribution, as stopcocks are essential in intensive care units and widely used for medical procedures such as IV therapy and anesthesia. Cuba faces critical shortages in not only life-saving medications and medical supplies, but also fuel, food, and other basic necessities due to the decades-long U.S. blockade and its ludicrous designation of the country as a state sponsor of terrorism. The pro-Israel lobby APEC now has its sights set on Taiwan. The American-Israel Public Affairs Committee, or AIPAC, sent its first delegation to Taipei last Monday, October 27th. In his opening remarks at the APEC dinner, Taiwan's leader, William Lai-Ching-te, stated that Israel was a so-called valuable model of defense for Taiwan. Lai is hoping for deeper collaboration with the U.S. and Israel in the areas of semiconductors, ICT, and cybersecurity, despite ongoing protests at home over the U.S.-Israel genocide in Gaza. Taiwan has maintained commercial ties with Tel Aviv since 1993 through an economic and trade office in Taipei. Donald Trump visited South Korea last week, meeting with both President Xi Jinping and President Myung. What are the agreements that came out of these two meetings, and what's next for the ongoing trade war, for the new Cold War on China? To discuss this, we are so pleased to have on Dae-Han Song. Dae-Han is part of the team at the International Strategy Center and also a member of the No Cold War Collective. He's based in Seoul. Dae-Han, welcome to the China Report.
Hello, hi, thank you for having me.
Well, we have a lot to talk about today, so I think we should get started. I want to start off with Trump's meeting with South Korean President Myung. What immediately jumped out at me about this agreement that came out of this was that South Korea will invest $350 billion in the U.S. as an exchange for Trump lowering his tariff rate on South Korea. And that includes $200 billion in cash, while the rest will go to cooperation in shipbuilding. The U.S. lags behind in this sector. South Korea is the second largest shipbuilder behind China, if I'm not mistaken. And this is an opportunity that the U.S. sees as a way to catch up to China. Also, as part of this agreement, Trump had given his approval for South Korea to build a nuclear-powered submarine. South Korea, obviously, a key ally in the U.S.'s military encirclement of China. So, this all just seems like a huge extortion scheme to me, hundreds of billions of dollars from South Korea going to the U.S. Walk us through these agreements and what you make of all this.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's complete tariff extortion, right? Like, I think oftentimes Lee's diplomacy was kind of applauded in South Korea for achieving, going down from 25% to 15%. But I don't think like anybody realizes that there was a free trade agreement, right? The zero tariffs that were achieved, they were not like a giveaway to South Korea. They were achieved by like very difficult negotiation in which South Korea had to adopt a lot of toxic provisions from the United States, including the investor state dispute settlement system, right? And just it is tariff extortion, right? Because it's like a $200 billion investment, but the United States gets to keep 50% of the profits, right? The U.S. is not putting any money forward, but it's taking 50% of profits. It's crazy. Not only is the Lee administration not investing in South Korea's economy, in creating jobs and in improving the lives of people in Korea, it's investing in the United States to make the U.S. military even more powerful and even more destructive. Like, that's insane, right? At a time of global warming, when we should be focusing our efforts in, coming together as a global society and figuring out how to deal with climate change, like there's this massive military Keynesianism happening, and South Korea is in effect like helping the U.S. just maintain its military global dominance.
Mm-hmm. Well, Myung was elected earlier this year after Yoon Suk-yeol's impeachment. He ran on a platform of what he called resetting relations with China, which was seen as a bit of a departure from Yoon Suk-yeol's maybe like more enthusiastic participation in Washington's Cold War strategy. And from what I understand, Lee pitched the submarine deal with the U.S. as a way to help its Navy ships patrol waters near China and North Korea and, lessen the burden on the U.S. military. And he also promised Trump during their meeting that they would increase military spending to counter China. So you've got this situation where Seoul is like very much intertwined with these military agreements with Washington, while economically still very interdependent with China. And I'm also thinking about how Beijing is a key ally to South Korea in trying to revive dialogue and revive relations with North Korea, which I believe was another point in Lee's campaign to get elected. But, it's always the U.S. antagonizing the North, right? So I'm wondering, how have you seen Lee's ability to balance pressure from the Trump administration while also trying to maintain or recalibrate relations with China? And is this balance of competing interests even possible in the long run?
Sure. When I think like compared to Yoon Sung Yeol, like Yoon Sung Yeol was just like a die-hard like pro-America, right? Like he was singing like American Pie. It's just kind of like making a fool of himself and basically said yes to everything that the United States asked for. I think in contrast, the Lee administration is a bit more pragmatic, right? It understands that we are seeing seismic shifts in the global order, and that China is going to become a very important role in, in the global order that is taking shape, right? So in that regard, I do think that there is a real interest in rebalancing. How it does that, I think it would be very interesting to see. I think one of the interesting things was that um, while Lee Jae-myung is doing all these things around the military Keynesianism with Trump, on the other hand, I think there was like a summit or an exchange between like South Korea, Japan, and China around like renewable energy, right? So on the one hand, you have like Trump, who is a climate change denier, and on the other hand, like I mean, South Korea acknowledges climate change and
Mm.
it acknowledges the need for renewable energy. So I could see how there's a certain rebalancing where it's gonna try to achieve certain things together with China, which China has like a certain vision around renewable energy, while at the same time trying to like do the things that they're doing with Trump. So there is a certain rebalancing, but I also think that Lee is just playing a very dangerous game by giving in to many of Trump's demands to uh, basically strengthen U.S. military.
Mm. Mm. Well, Trump met with South Korean President Lee Jae-myung. Of course, he also had another highly anticipated meeting with President Xi Jinping, which brought the two sides to a trade agreement after weeks of escalation. So as part of this agreement, Washington is agreeing to lower fentanyl tariffs from 20% to 10%. It's agreeing to suspend its 50% rule for its entities list, which resulted in something like 20,000 Chinese companies suddenly blacklisted under U.S. sanctions. And that was what had provoked Beijing to expand its rare earth controls in the first place. Washington is backing down from its 100% tariff threat, and it's also suspending ship port fees. In exchange, Beijing is rolling back its expanded rare earth restrictions for 1 year, suspending its ship port fees, cracking down on the export of chemicals used to produce fentanyl, and they also agreed to resume buying U.S. soybeans. So this is a truce agreement that will be revisited after a year. I'm just curious to know, this was a really high stakes meeting. What's your analysis of this meeting and who won this battle during the trade war?
I think China totally won, in many regards, Trump was the one that fired the first shots. And then now he's like, I want a truce. And he just needed some like face saving measures. And I think that's some of the things that China was willing to give him. In many regards, like China, even though China's trade with the United States was impacted, I think like China's GDP wasn't significantly impacted. It just in some ways, China is like decoupling from the United States, right? China's trade like shifted to other countries like ASEAN countries, right? So in that regard, I think, Trump tried to bully China and China didn't back down. And now Trump just needed a face saving kind of way to like back down from it, right? And that's what they gave him, right?
Mm. Well, what's really funny to me is the showmanship of Trump around this trade war. And you can really see how he's this businessman, this reality TV show star, the way that he presents himself as attaining this win. After his meeting with Xi, just the way he was talking about this meeting, describing it as a 12 out of 10, hailing it as a success, him immediately posting to Truth Social that my G2 meeting with President Xi of China was a great one for both our countries, when even before the two sat down. Mainstream media was already saying that China had won this trade war. And It just seems to me that this trade truce really brings us back to the status quo before Trump's Liberation Day, which maybe speaks to a few things, right? It speaks to, despite the fact that, Trump has all this bravado, it's really it speaks to the success of Beijing's tactic of escalating to force the other side to de-escalate, which maybe also speaks to the fact that Beijing has now emerged as an economic peer, one that's powerful enough to check Washington and put it in its place.
Sure. And not only that, Trump is antagonizing all these countries, and basically China's like, hey, look, we're opposed to Trump's tariff war, right? And in that regard, it's becoming kind of like the only recourse for a lot of countries, right? So I think Trump's tariff war, in many regards, doesn't show the strength of the U.S. In fact, it shows its weakness, right? In the past, the U.S. had a certain kind of largesse that it could afford in its, just in its overwhelming power. But now that it's becoming weaker, it's like it's not able to do so, right? And in many regards, this kind of like tariff war is just it's just a way to liquidate a lot of the goodwill that it tried to plant previously in order to maintain its kind of like a status as this like powerful superpower, right? And now that that's declining, they're just kind of like becoming a lot more stingy, right? A lot of more stingy, extortionist. And yeah, so in many regards, I think Trump's tariff war is failing. And I think that's showing that it's accelerating kind of like the decline of the United States.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to turn to something that's probably somewhat pretty significant. It's that Pete Hegseth released this statement on X on Saturday, which states that after his own meeting with his Malaysian, with China's Minister of National Defense, and Trump's historic meeting with Xi, Hegseth said, we set the tone for everlasting peace and success for the U.S. and China. The Department of War will do the same. Peace through strength, mutual respect, and positive relations. China's Minister of National Defense, Admiral Dong Jun, in Malaysia and I also agreed that we should set up military-to-military channels to de-conflict and de-escalate any problems that arise. We have more meetings on that coming soon. God bless both China and the USA. So this messaging stands in pretty stark contrast both to the agreements that South Korea and the U.S. agreed to that we just discussed, but it also stands in contrast to Hegseth's own hawkish language in his address in front of the ASEAN foreign ministers last week, where he warned South Asian countries about what he saw as Beijing's aggressive actions in the South China Sea, and he urged them to stand firm in challenging China's presence in the sea. So what do you make of this Hegseth statement? And is it really indicative of a rebooting of U.S. China relations?
I think that right now, basically the United States, I believe that it's like very much committed to this Cold War, a new Cold War that it's waging to contain China. So yeah, I think a lot of these statements kind of just come and go, right? Like they might make a statement like this, and then later something happens, and it becomes a pretext for escalating things, or conversations can be happening behind the scenes, regardless, right? So in that regard, I don't quite buy. Those are just words, right? Words have to be followed with actions. And I don't think the actions are seen yet. So, once actions start happening, then yeah, maybe it's something that, it should be something that's very welcome, but we have to see, but, I don't buy it.
Well, Trump's visit to South Korea coincided with the APEC Leaders Summit, although he decided to skip it this year. Surely the people of South Korea can't be happy with Trump's shakedown of handing over hundreds of billions of dollars to the U.S. So, how have the people responded to these latest developments? I know that there have been, some protests in the street against Trump, against APEC. I imagine that you've been following them. So, can you talk a little bit about that and what are their demands?
Sure. Basically, we had there were a set of protests that happened on the 29th in Gyeongju when Trump was visiting. Trump came on the 29th and then he left on the 30th. And then there were also press conferences on the 31st. And then on the 1st, there was another protest and a rally and a march. And basically, we're talking about like stopping Trump's trade extortionism, right? And there were also just demands against, I mean, more than just Trump's extortion, we oppose like his sexism. We oppose like his crackdown on immigrants. We oppose his warmongering. We oppose like his military Keynesianism, his forcing countries to like spend even more and more on the military when the world should be focusing more and more on like how to develop and how to find peace, how to resolve climate change. These are the things that we opposed, right? And I think for us, um, we wanted to make a stand against Trump, right? And so for us, we there was a People's Declaration, and within the People's Declaration, we also called for a another set of protests to happen globally on January 20th, or on the first year anniversary of the Trump administration. So yeah, I mean, ultimately, for us, it was more than just APEC, right? It was about the political moment that we're in that might start with APEC, but it surely does not end there because, it's not just about trade that it's not just trade that we're facing, right? Trade problems. We're also facing problems about war and existential ones like climate change, right? And none of this stuff is being discussed in APEC, right? And APEC meetings are happening all behind closed doors, right? They're discussing very important things like AI or aging populations, all these things, but none of it is open to the public. The media does a terrible job discussing any of this. Any of the discussions are happening, and the people that are showing up are like Nvidia, they're like Microsoft, they're like U.S. power companies, and on these discussions that shape the future of the world.
Mm. Um, For those that might not be familiar with APEC or what it is, I saw you give a really great presentation explaining exactly what APEC is for a Nota Dole panel maybe a week or two ago. So yeah, maybe for people who are unfamiliar, can you explain APEC and its mission?
Sure. APEC is the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum. And basically, it's a gathering that happens every year. And I think a lot of people think that it's just the Leader Summit, the one that happened October 31st and November 1st. They think that that's all that it is. But in fact, it's a year-long process. It's a year-long consensus building process. It's a trilateral meeting between businesses, governments, and experts slash academics, right? They're covering like all the issues that matter in society and the world, right? We're talking about renewable energy. We're talking about like how food security. We're talking about like how to overcome sexism or gender inequality. AI, all these things. But like the public is not a part of these conversations at all, and nor are the elements of the conversation being disclosed to the public, right? So, in fact, APEC almost becomes like a spectacle, right? All that the public sees is who is going to come, and that G Dragon is the APEC ambassador. It's like people are given bread and circus while all these important decisions are happening behind closed doors. And yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons why we were protesting. But ultimately, like APEC, its roots itself, it's like ultimately centered on corporations, on multinational corporations, and how to make it easier for them to extract greater profits. So, yeah, I mean, APEC ultimately makes all these important has all these important discussions that impact everybody, but everybody's left out. And ultimately, its understanding of economic cooperation is like very limited, right? It just sees economy, it just sees corporations. It doesn't see like workers, farmers, just everybody and anybody that is affected by the economy and that makes the economy. We're all part of this economy, but economic cooperation here is like very narrowly defined to be the interests and needs of corporations.
Yeah, I think you also explained like something that was like called the flying duck strategy of APEC as a way of economic development. Could you explain that? Because I found it really interesting.
Sure. Originally, the idea of APEC, it emerged maybe kind of like the origins of the idea emerged in 1966 when a Japanese economist proposed a free trade area of the Asia Pacific. And basically, during the 70s, 80s, Japan was creating these kind of like regional value chains. And in part, kind of like one of its justifications that it used was this notion of the flying geese, right?
Mm.
It was the notion that the leading goose, right, would mature out, for example, Japan would mature out of an economy or out of an industry. And once it did that, it would pass it on to the next flying geese, right? Whether it's the newly industrializing countries like South Korea and Taiwan back then, and then when those countries kind of like mature out of this industry, it will pass it on to like Malaysia and Indonesia and whatnot. And of course, this is the Japan could say these things because Japan was the number two economy. I think a lot of us forget, right? But Japan had massive growth, right? And in that regard, it kind of gained a certain level of a certain aura, right? As a country that succeeded in industrializing very rapidly and in having a lot of growth. So I think that's what was able to sell the idea. But this idea itself, like, dates back to like Japanese imperialism, right? It was an idea that was used to sell kind of like this Japanese imperialist notion of a greater like greater Asia prosperity community that was ultimately centered on Japan, right? On Japan's imperialist interests. And ultimately, this is how, at the heart of like what APEC is kind of justified with this, right? Is the idea that if you make yourself friendly to corporations, you're going to get foreign direct investment.
Mm. Well, Dae-Han Song, thank you so much for joining us on the China Report. Maybe to end, could you let people know where people can find your work if you're working on anything right now?
Sure. You could find us at goiac.org. And also we have an Instagram page, which is goiac. So you could check us out there.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Did you know that China has a national holiday for its sanitation workers? Starting in 1987, October 26th has been designated National Sanitation Workers Day, a day to honor those that work tirelessly to keep its cities clean and prevent the spread of diseases by disinfecting public areas. And according to the Ministry of Housing and Urban Rural Development, the total number of sanitation workers in China reached 1.8 million people in 2020. This year, a Douyin content creator produced this viral video celebrating these essential workers. We hope you enjoyed the show today. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you next week on the China Report.